Hi, everyone, and welcome. I am joined today by Scott Ritter, a former intelligence officer and major in the United States Marine Corps, and also a UN weapons inspector. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So we see now that the US, well, at least appears to be pushing for negotiations with both Russia and, well, across the Middle East, at least with Israel, less certain, but at least with Iran. But I thought we could maybe start with Ukraine because, well, Washington argues now that the Ukrainians, Europeans, and Russians they must put forward proposals. Otherwise, the United States will simply walk away. It's unclear if it means that the United States will also cut its weapon supply, intelligence, and logistics. But as we see, Russia has very high demands. The Ukrainians and Europeans do not seem to be willing to move at all. And I guess it begs the question, is there a deal to be made here to begin with?
Well, what's curious is, first of all, we have to commend the Trump administration for even talking with the Russians. This is a major step forward compared to the posture taken by the Biden administration prior, which had basically cut off all diplomatic relations. So the Trump administration, gets applause, at least from me, for willing to engage. And the other interesting aspect is early on in this engagement, the Trump administration seemed to acknowledge the need to embrace reality, not posture politically. They dropped the pretense of, trying to say that this was a war begun by Russia, that Russia invaded Ukraine. Instead, they began to speak about the reality of the situation, that NATO expansion was a large driver for this war, and that Zelensky bore a great deal of responsibility for this conflict. And the president and many of those advising him, insinuated that if they were Vladimir Putin, they would have done the same thing. That they feel that Russia had every right to act in its self-defense in engaging in the special military operation. Secretary of State Marco Rubio even went so far as to publicly state that this is a war between the United States and Russia with Ukraine as the proxy. The United States has also acknowledged NATO's role and Europe's role in this conflict. So the reason why I wanted to set that up is why suddenly does the United States believe that Russia has to act as if it is the party that has done something wrong and therefore must make concessions? The United States, has Donald Trump has criticized Zelensky, rightfully, I believe, and has indicated that Ukraine needs to make some steps. But the United States hasn't taken the same tone towards Europe. It's as if Europe had nothing to do with the Ukrainian conflict, as if NATO had nothing to do with this conflict. And this is the mistake. Europe and Ukraine must make all of the concessions because Europe and Ukraine are singularly responsible for this conflict. Russia will make no concessions because Russia is the aggrieved party. Moreover, Russia is the victor in this war. There's no one who is a serious analyst today who can postulate the possibility of Ukrainian military victory. Russia has the strategic advantage, and every indicator is that Russia will retain the strategic advantage. Therefore, any expectation on the part of the United States that Russia must make concessions to Europe and to Ukraine are ridiculous on their face and unrealistic and simply won't happen. Russia has clearly articulated its position, and it's up to the United States, if it wants to bring it into this conflict, to get Europe and Ukraine on board. Otherwise, I don't think Russia cares if the United States walks away. I want to remind everybody that Russia didn't invite America to the party. As Secretary of State Rubio indicated, America is on the other side, the wrong side, the enemy. America has been fighting against the Russians using Ukraine as a proxy. So suddenly for Donald Trump to walk in and say, I'm the peacemaker, in order to do that, he has to divorce himself from the failed policies of the past, which he has tried to do. But he can't pretend that the United States holds any moral authority here. We helped start this war. We definitely sustained this war. And Russia is not obligated to give us anything.
Well, yeah, I think certainly this is well the greatest contribution by Trump because I think the all of NATO, under Biden administration and still the Europeans, they locked themselves into this corner by all committing to this narrative that was an unprovoked invasion. It had nothing to do with NATO. Again, under this narrative, there's no room for negotiations as Russia just wanted territory. We used the language of appeasement and couldn't get through a sentence without bringing up Hitler. So I think, yeah, this is the main contribution because once you recognize it was provoked, this is a conflict, as you said, Marco Rubio said, between NATO and Russia, then you have something to negotiate about. You can find a peace. But I picked up on the same thing as you. I didn't notice where if we do recognize that that is NATO countries are participant, how do we enter into these negotiations? Because I saw the same with Kellogg's proposal. I mean, he says the Ukrainians have to do this, Russians this, and then we have a ceasefire. But now a ceasefire is a bit strange without political settlement. It's a bit strange solution. But nonetheless, why wasn't there any demands on the Europeans not to send weapons in during a ceasefire? Why not? The Europeans aren't allowed to send any troops inside. Well, why is NATO suddenly still this innocent third party, which is just, wanting to help Ukraine? It is a bit strange. And it also, yeah, takes me to my question, which is, why isn't the United States doing more? We seem to be putting all this pressure on Zelensky to accept that they will not join NATO. But why do they have a vote? They're not part of NATO. There's no it's not possible for the United States to say, okay, we're going to sign a deal that Ukraine will never be part of NATO. Why? And, NATO should not put troops in Ukraine. Why? It's as if the NATO can't help it. It's just, this unstoppable force. And so Russia has to make a deal with the Ukrainians. But this is NATO. Why can't NATO make a deal with the Russians?
I think Donald Trump is a prisoner of his own history. Remember, this is his second term. His first term started 8 years ago. And his first term was marked by Donald Trump expanding American military assistance to Ukraine. The military training that began in 2015, honchoed by the United States, brought in NATO. This training was specifically in support of a mission statement that had the United States and NATO training the Ukrainian army, building the Ukrainian army up to NATO standards, and preparing it to launch a war of liberation of the Donbass and Crimea. Specifically, this army was being trained to fight the Russians. Donald Trump inherited this and expanded upon it. He knew what the mission was. There was no pretense that what we were doing was about the defense of NATO. Donald Trump today brags, I gave them offensive weapons, he says. I gave them why? Why would you give them offensive weapons? And one thing that nobody talks about is the construction of 20 CIA bases inside Ukraine. This was done under Donald Trump. What was the mission statement of these bases? To hold hands and sing Kumbaya, to learn how to sing Katushka, maybe Moscow Nights. No, it was to carry out covert operations against Russia in support of a strategic posture by the United States that sought the strategic defeat of Russia using Ukraine as a proxy. Donald Trump is the man behind this policy. And to get this policy in place, the United States under Trump worked with NATO to generate support and worked with Ukraine to create a consensus policy direction designed to create a conflict to undermine Russia to bring down Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump's a prisoner. This is Donald Trump's war. No matter how much he wants to say Joe Biden's war, the fact of the matter is that Trump created all of the preconditions to this conflict. Trump did. So now today, Trump is a prisoner of this reality. And I think he doesn't want to talk about it too much because he runs the risk of people raising their hand and raising inconvenient truths. So what Trump has done is broken his team into two parts. One part of it is the Keith Kellogg part. I think Mike Waltz is on this side. These are the pro NATO, very sympathetic to Ukraine people. These are the people that have been in that camp from day one, who still believe ultimately the American mission should be to use Ukraine to bring down Russia. Then on the other side, he has the people that are supportive of the policies that he are articulating, bringing an end to the conflict, normalizing relations with Russia. I might say that Marco Rubio is in that first camp as well. But the second camp, this is where you get the Pete Hegseths, you get the J.D. Vances, you get a new name that's emerged, Steve Witkoff, a man who prior to this iteration of the Trump administration, nobody knew about. And today he's one of the most accomplished diplomats in the world, uh, doing Kissingerian type, shuttle diplomacy. And I say that with praise. I mean, I'm in awe of what Witkoff is doing. And I admire what he's doing, and I hope that he succeeds. But Trump has created this bipolar national security team that's at war with itself. They're out there. There is no discipline in terms of messaging right now. You can get Witkoff to meet with Putin and say one thing, then immediately you have Kellogg go on TV and say something completely different. So basically, we have a Ukrainian policy that's at war with itself. And this leads to dysfunction because how do you expect Europe to, what are they supposed to align themselves to? Which wing of the Trump party? And what they do is they gravitate around that which expresses sympathy for their point of view, which is the Kellogg, Rubio, Mike Waltz, um, center of gravity, in hopes that this other center of gravity under Witkoff and everybody, falls in on them instead of the other way around. And if Trump doesn't fix this, if he doesn't exercise, executive control over this, it's a policy that's doomed to fail. Now, the good news is, if there's any good news, is I think that this Ukrainian peace initiative is going to collapse. I don't have confidence in the Trump team to pull it together, but I think that Trump's strategic vision of having better relations with Russia will survive. That Trump will walk away from this Ukraine conflict, and in doing so, walk away from Ukraine and walk away from NATO, meaning that he's going to let Ukraine and NATO stew in their own juices. Russia will have to do the hard lifting, the heavy lifting, and finish this job militarily. And at some point in time, Ukraine is going to have to accept terms of surrender. They're going to be far harsher than the terms that are currently put on the table. And NATO will be in a far more difficult position, having been embarrassed without any American backstop. And U.S.-Russian relations, I think, will develop. We will develop strategic alignment on some critical issues. We're not going to be best friends, but I think we're going to be in a position where we treat each other with respect. We recognize respective areas of interest, and we try to get out of each other's way when it comes to China.
Well, yes, one thing that confused me a bit was the content of this peace they're pushing, because it seemed as if the deal the United States was pushing forward to the Ukrainians was all focused around Crimea, and this was a bit strange to me because the Russians, they kind of put their demands very clear and they repeat them over and over. We want, neutrality for Ukraine and also territorial concessions for the territories that were lost in the war. But why is Crimea? I heard talks about reducing sanctions, but the Russians didn't ask for it. They asked for, they're focusing a lot on Crimea, recognizing Crimea, but the Russians didn't really ask for this either. Why is this the seemingly the central focus of talks?
Okay, I'm going to answer the question because I've thought about this too, but
Yeah,
it's full of speculation. So I need to acknowledge that up front. This is just my assessment.
yeah, I think that's all we have now because they
But
haven't explained this. So yeah,
when I take a look at the statements made by Donald Trump and his administration, but especially Trump, it's very important, although sometimes frustrating, to read his social media postings. uh, because they're confusing. But on Crimea, he spends an awful lot of time criticizing Ukraine and Obama. He says that Ukraine lost this under Obama, not me under Obama. And Ukraine, why didn't you even fire a shot in defense of this? You let the Russians take over, but you didn't defend it. Now you want us to back a war to reconquer it. This is Obama's fault. This is your fault. It's not my fault. I have to deal with the reality. And the reality is that that Russia owns Crimea and it is Russian and it's going to be Russian. You're never going to get it back. See, he can say these things because it deflects all responsibility off of him. And that's the important thing. That's why he's singularly focused on Crimea, because his hands aren't dirty. But if Trump turns around and gives up Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk, then the fault is with him. It's Trump that's done the giveaway. It's Trump that gave it up with a single shot. And so Trump is creating this alternative reality of trying to blame everybody else but him, trying to create a peace where he is with no fault, etc. And it doesn't matter that Witkoff keeps coming back to him going, hey, boss, the Russians are saying no, all of those territories belong to them, and they're not giving them back. Constitutionally, impossible. We're going to have to give it to them. Crimea, but boss, I'm trying to tell you, there's 4 other territories there. Crimea, Trump only hears what he wants to hear. He only says what he wants to say, and this is why ultimately these negotiations will fail, because Trump isn't willing to take a leadership position. It would be the easiest thing in the world, literally, to get Europe to fold and get Ukraine to fold. Ukraine would be more difficult because there are some hardliners in there. I think, to be honest, it's a death sentence for Zelensky if he accepts anything that Trump is trying to put in. But Zelensky had a death penalty on his head for a long time now for what he's done. Ultimately, Ukraine isn't going to survive this conflict. There's no scenario under which Ukraine does survive this conflict. And so you would have to get Europe basically to say, Ukraine's done. Yield it to Russia. It's a Russian problem. Let the Russians solve this problem. And American leadership could do that, because what we would have to do is convince Europe that we draw the line at Ukraine, that there will be no other Russian adventures. Russia will not be going into Moldova. Russia will not be threatening the Baltic states. We could make these states, because Russia doesn't want to threaten these stations. This is an easy posture for the United States to take, because it literally costs us nothing. And it goes hand in glove with our attempt to better relations. But we're not doing that. We've allowed the Europeans to attach value to Ukraine, psychological value, moral value, economic value that simply doesn't exist. Ukraine is literally the pit that you throw money into and it just keeps you can't fix. Good American leadership could get Europe to walk away from Ukraine, and America could shoulder the blame. It's easy to do, because that one, all Trump has to do is say, nah, this is Obama and Biden's fault. And he has a MAGA base here in America that would accept that. But he's not willing to do that. He does, because his team is split and he has this pro-European team. He needs to either fire or absorb, convince the European team to, unify with the Trump team. If he could get Europe to back away from Ukraine, then this conflict will end. It means the end of Ukraine. I can't come up with a single scenario where a sovereign Ukraine state emerges from this conflict. Russia simply won't allow it to happen.
It is interesting with Trump, though. When the stock markets goes down, it's Biden's economy. When it goes back up, it's Trump economy. It's yeah, he
It's a
does.
nice world. It's a nice world he's created for himself.
Yeah, it's very comfortable, and there's no responsibility there. But well, when you look at the Europeans, though, they don't seem to, well, so far accept much at all. They keep saying they want an unconditional ceasefire, which appears to be code for let's not talk about political settlement. They're talking about European peacekeepers, although they seem to recognize they can't scrape together more than 25,000. But I think for many of them, they're looking at this whole thing and wondering, well, what is Trump actually going to do? Is he going to walk away or not? Because he's not walking away. We can just continue to drag this on. But is there any other way that Trump can get some cooperation from the Europeans to end the war besides threatening? And I guess he will have to actually walk away from the war as well.
I think again, this is where American leadership comes in. I can't speak for Donald Trump, and I can't claim to know what's going on behind closed doors. I believe that there is a desire on the part of the Trump administration to disentangle the United States from this European nightmare, because it is a nightmare. Europe is an absolute nightmare. I apologize. I know you're part of Europe, but I struggle to see the viability of the European Union experiment. I see Europe fracturing on so many different fault lines. I don't see um, you know continuity of purpose, and I also don't see Europe being able to have a single vision on not just economic issues but military issues. How to create this. The only thing that allows Europe to speak cohesively militarily is NATO. Um, and NATO can only exist if the United States is a willing and meaningful party to NATO. So Trump is talking about disentangling himself from this, but the if you want to, if you don't want to divorce completely from Europe, even though that might be attractive to people like me, it's not a realistic policy. We're not going to divorce ourselves from Europe. There's too much history there. There's too much economic alignment. And frankly speaking, um, the United States still has very much a European heart, meaning that we, as a land of immigrants, we still derive most of our cultural and ethnic and historic links to the European continent. So we're not going to divorce from Europe. Um, so I think Trump needs to be very clear about how he sees America's role in Europe going forward. Um, what I would say is, if I were advising them, is that we need to assure the Europeans that we are not going to leave NATO, that NATO will continue to exist and America will continue to be the strategic backstop for Europe, but that NATO will become an exclusively defensive organization, that the day of trying to project NATO power into the Pacific, into North Africa, into the Middle East is over. NATO must be 100% defensive oriented, and that the defense that we build must be, um, you know, shaped in accordance with the reality of the threat. And since the United States is the NATO leader, since we are your backstop, we are making peace with Russia. So NATO must size itself accordingly. You are not at war with Russia. You are not to prepare for war against Russia. Your military should not be designed to defeat Russia on the battlefield. That's it. We will make you professional. We will sharpen things up. We'll improve. You guys will be cutting edge. And if anybody attacks you, you'll be able to defend yourself. But the day of NATO defining itself as a bulwark against Russian expansion must end. And if you're not willing to accept this, we're done with you. And if we leave you in its entirety. It will be all upon you, and you can't afford to do this. You don't have the economic capacity. You don't have the unified vision. You will fail. So it's your choice. If you want us to do this leadership position, you must divorce yourself from Ukraine. That is finished. And then I would also tell the European Union, you need to stop this trend towards European autocracy. You have to allow nations to express themselves democratically. And if Hungary decides that it has a certain aspect of sovereignty, that must be respected. If Romania decides, that must be respected. But the day of the European Union going in and interfering with the domestic internal politics of its constituent members must end because the United States will not tolerate this. And the reason why I would insist on doing this isn't because the United States believes in democracy, because we know the United States doesn't believe in democracy. It's a mechanism of control. Um, because if we're going to maintain this level of military involvement, we have to ensure that Europe never gets us inadvertently into another conflict. Because the strategic goal isn't to double down on Europe, it's to disentangle from Europe. So if we're to stay in NATO, we have to make sure that we have the political ability to keep Europe from becoming a monster. And you can only do that by encouraging individual nations to express their sovereign rights and prevent Europe from coming together as a singularity.
That makes a lot of sense. But yeah, well, Trump he seems to be on that track, though he takes a very negative view of the European Union. I guess Elon Musk even more vocal in his disdain for that bloc. But you mentioned earlier the Ukraine, the Zelensky might, not be able to pull off a deal without being, yeah, I guess killed. I guess is a reference to the nationalists because again they've had tremendous power since 2014. But is there any other obstacles? I mean, with the legal issues, there might be problems. Of course, Zelensky opposing everything. You have uh, yeah, who do you talk to? I mean, this is going to be very difficult for any Ukrainian to accept. Do you see it as any possibility of any deal being made, or do they have, or will they first come to the negotiation table once the like collapse have begun, when they lose control over their armed forces? How do you? Because I just can't see the nationalists being willing to negotiate on anything. I mean, they're yeah, they're very determined.
Well, I mean, I think in late 1944, early 1945, there were a large number of SS formations in the German military, a lot of Nazi paramilitary entities, party loyalists who were saying, we will never surrender. And yet in May, they had been defeated. Um, I don't mean to be too harsh here, but if you're a Ukrainian nationalist, your future is grim. And you need to be told this. You're going to die. You either die on the battlefield or you'll be executed for the crimes you have committed. There is no sympathy here. You don't get a second chance. If you haven't committed crimes worthy of the death penalty, you are going to be arrested, prosecuted, and you're going to spend a hell of a lot of time in jail. And if your crimes aren't that much, we can rehabilitate you and try to reintegrate you into lower elements of society, but you will never be in a power position. This is your fate. And we have to just, that's what denazification is. And this is what the Russians are saying to me and to other people. This is the harsh reality. So the nationalists can posture all they want. They're going to die, just like the Nazis died. Or they can go into diaspora. Maybe the West will be a willing recipient for a fifth wave of Ukrainian immigration, where we can bring all the Nazis over here and let them go to summer camp down here in Ellenville, and they can get government funded sinecures, etc., whatever. But within Ukraine, they're dead. That's the reality. I don't know why people are pretending otherwise. The Waffen SS talked big up until the point when they were dead, when they were defeated. And Russia is on track to defeating these nationalists on the battlefield. But part of the denazification process, which Russia is not walking away from, is constitutional changes in the government. The government will be replaced. Zelensky is not the future of Ukraine. And governments sympathetic to Zelensky aren't the future of Ukraine. If you have ever taken a photograph smiling with Stepan Bandera's portrait on the wall behind you, you will not be part of the political future of Ukraine. Yes, I'm speaking to you, General Zaluzhny, you Ukrainian nationalist son of a bitch, and all of the other guys out there who've embraced this odious ideology. And I apologize for swearing, but I have no sympathy for these people. None whatsoever. There's nothing attractive about their ideology. There's nothing that can be misconstrued about what they're trying to do. These are hate-filled ultranationalists. These are white supremacists who view anybody outside of their little, specifically defined clique as subhumans. You know what they say about the Russians, what they call the Russians, and how they treat the Russians. The Poles know how they treat the Poles. The Gypsies know how they treat the Gypsies. The Jews should know how they treat the Jews. And yet we're supposed to express sympathy for these people. We're supposed to say, well, we must find a place for them. Their place is under the ground or in prison or in exile. But their future is not part of Ukraine. And I can't speak for the Russian government, but I've been listening to Russian government officials speak, and I believe that what I'm saying is reflective of the reality of the policies they're planning in a post-conflict Ukraine. They will not allow the scourge of Nazi ideology manifested in the form of Stepan Bandera's odious take on life to continue to exist.
Yeah, no, I've been hearing similar things, so it's you're probably on track there. I wanted to switch gears a little bit towards the Middle East because, of course, there's negotiations being had there as well. Well, I guess a very broad question is: do you think the genocide in Gaza can be stopped, or it's? I guess I'm not sure how one would assess this. Is the Trump putting any weight or leaning on Netanyahu, or do you see none of this being possible, or do you see the uh, any realities on the ground compelling the Israelis to stop the killing?
Of course, the genocide can stop. It takes one phone call from the President of the United States to make the genocide stop. And we proved that in the past. Steve Witkoff's initial visit to the region resulted in a ceasefire because the president wanted a ceasefire, even though Netanyahu didn't want a ceasefire. We imposed it on them. But the president has to live in a world defined by reality. And I'm not happy about what I'm about to say, but it's the truth. The pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist lobby exercises unprecedented amounts of political influence and control here in the United States. So much so that it's almost impossible to get elected. It's impossible to get elected to senior office if you don't take a pro-Israeli stance. This president, in campaigning, took a very pro-Israeli stance, and this president has surrounded himself with probably the most pro-Israeli cabinet and subordinate officials, more so than any other president in modern history, more so than even Joe Biden, who called himself a Zionist. So this is a reality the president has to deal with. Now, how do you deal with this reality? And this is where it gets sad, because we don't care about the Palestinian people. We being the United States collective. Yes, we have people in the United States, including myself, who do care about the Palestinian people. We have protesters out there doing heroic work because they are paying a heavy price. We have people less heroic, like myself, who don't participate in the protest because I don't want to get arrested. And but I write and I get shut down and I get attacked and I get, it's not easy taking a stance in support of Palestine and a stance against Israel. But even despite all that, we're not moving the needle at all because nothing we're doing is impacting Donald Trump. So now the reality is Trump doesn't care about the Palestinians. He's willing to sacrifice them in support of a larger policy objective. Trump, just like he needs to disentangle himself from Europe, needs to disentangle himself from the Middle East. We cannot get bogged down in these decades-long wars that cost us trillions of dollars and divert significant economic, military, and political resources to a region. His number one focus is China. And he needs to create a world scenario that allows him to singularly focus on China without the threat of something destabilizing happening. This is why he's going to abandon the Ukraine conflict come hell or high water. We're not staying involved in Ukraine because our focus is China and Ukraine is a distraction. And this is why he's going to try to negotiate a peace, an agreement, a nuclear agreement with Iran, so that we can, it'll be an agreement that doesn't have clauses which create the potential for conflict down the road. This will be a final agreement. This will be the agreement that gives Iran the ability to have a nuclear enrichment program inspected, but the prospect of military action is going to be taken off the table because we don't want to go to war with Iran. Israel does. So when you say, can Trump say no to Netanyahu? Yes, he can. But politically, he has to have a pressure relief valve that compensates for the angst that peace with Iran is going to cause. And that pressure relief valve is Gaza. And he's going to give Israel the green light to do whatever the hell they want to do in Gaza, to bomb Beirut, to maneuver into Syria. You can do all that because that doesn't require American military support. Iran requires a tremendous amount of military support, which we don't want to do. So I think we're going to make peace with Iran, tell Israel to get where it needs to be on Gaza, and then bring it into the fighting and get the Houthi to stop interdicting shipping. And then we leave and we go to the Pacific. I think that's just strategic vision of Trump. But unfortunately, it means that the Palestinians are going to be sacrificed yet again. Yet again, we're going to say words about humanity that we don't mean. We are turning a blind eye to genocide. We are creating a situation in the United States where it's becoming illegal to criticize Israel. In the land of the free, the home of the brave, where free speech is supposed to reign supreme, it's now going to be illegal to speak out against Israel. This shows you, again, the control that the pro-Israeli lobby has on the United States.
This is strange. The supporting genocide, a-okay, but protesting it, that's where the law comes down. But well, my last question was if you think Netanyahu would permit peace with Iran, but I guess you answered his
He has
question.
no
So
choice. He has no choice. He's not a shot caller here. Israel cannot attack Iran on its own volition. It doesn't have the military capacity to initiate and sustain meaningful military strikes against Iran. And given Iran's demonstrated conventional ballistic missile deterrence, Israel will pay perhaps a fatal price for initiating an attack against Iran that doesn't decapitate its leadership and eliminate the totality of its capabilities. And so, if the United States isn't willing to align itself with Israel, there's nothing Netanyahu can do. There's nothing Netanyahu can do.
well, Scott Ritter, thank you so much for your time. It's been very, very interesting as there's so much. I guess Trump does it on purpose, the strategic ambiguity, which he implements into his negotiation tactics. So it's easy to get confused. So yeah, thank you again.
It keeps us employed. So,
Yeah, doesn't it?
okay. Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Have a great day.
Thanks again.